The lighting's better here for the video. Also, I've noticed that when I stand there and preach and the video is capturing the choir the whole time, so that forces them to be on camera the whole time. That's not fair. So today is the Feast of Epiphany, a Greek word meaning manifestation. And it is a major feast day for the Greek Orthodox, but they actually call it the Feast of Theophany, meaning the same thing, the showing of a God, the revelation of a God, but in our case, the God. And the crucial gospel story that we hear today is from Matthew, in which the wise men, we don't know they were three, we do know that they were not kings, so wise men traveled from the east, but most likely really from the north, Syria, because they had the scientific skills to discern that there was a new star in the heavens. Follow the star, follow the light to see the birth of a new king, because this star announcing the birth was one of the main symbols used in their time to discern when the birth of a king was occurring. So you think about everything that happens in the story. First, they're watching this star and seeking that light, following that light. They ask for help from the leadership, and what happens? We know the sinister intentions of Herod. It says he's frightened when he hears about the birth of the King of the Jews. And we know that he has nefarious intentions because, like all oppressors who are intent upon carrying out their evil forever, they're afraid of losing power and all the wealth that goes with it. They bring their gifts and share them with the family when they arrive. And then at the end, having been warned in a dream not to tell Herod where the baby was, they go home by another route. In other words, they avoid colluding with evil. All the readings for Epiphany, which, by the way, we're not supposed to do on this Sunday. We're supposed to do it tomorrow, but since none of us are coming to church tomorrow, I cheated and I'm putting them on today. Shh. All of the readings have a variety of themes. They talk about a great leader who is coming and the light that he shall bring. They talk about how he is going to, or they are going to free us from oppressors, that they are going to raise up the poor and the needy. They talk about a light coming into the world. But which light coming into the world? Last Sunday, we heard in John's Gospel, chapter 1, the prologue, the famous prologue, verses 1 to 18, that Jesus was the light that came into the world and is the light of the world, and that no darkness could overcome this light. And he says the word light in that prologue several times. And yet today, we hear in the first lines of Isaiah 60, "Arise, shine, for your light has come." It says that we, the listeners of that word, are going to shine ourselves. And in this same Gospel of Matthew that we heard from today, in chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." And then he says several other things, and he says, "So let your light shine so that others may see your good works and then see the glory of God." So we talk about the manifestation of light in this season of light, that Christ is the light of the world, but the readings today are reminding us, and Christ reminds us, that we also are the light of the world. Not that light, but that we reflect the light. As you know, reflected light can be nearly as powerful as the actual light itself. And even if we refract the light, in other words, we receive the light and it hits us and we kind of bend it and we don't quite exactly reflect the bright white light of Christ, we still create beautiful colors of the rainbow as we refract the light, showing forth what we can of the light of Christ. So I was thinking about this, how it is that we can be the light of Christ without actually being the exact Christ ourselves. And I was reminded of two luminaries. It's interesting that we call great people luminaries, isn't it? That means light givers, light bearers. And one of my favorites is Archbishop Tutu, who I often think about at Epiphany because he died on December 26th, 2021. And the other person is Jimmy Carter, who, as you know, died December 29th of this past year. And last night I was at a gathering, and a person who doesn't go to church very often said, "Hey, are you going to talk about Jimmy Carter tomorrow?" And I said I hadn't planned on it. I generally do not talk about political leaders, past or present. But then I thought, interesting. Archbishop Tutu was a churchman who had to do politics to bring about the change he brought about in the world. And Jimmy Carter was a statesman who became one of the most famous Christians in the world. So I want to talk about Archbishop Tutu just for a minute. I'm sure you all know who he is. But born in the 1930s in South Africa, just right before they instituted all the weird laws that made up apartheid, just the white leaders of South Africa decided that they were going to institute apartheid, which was a series of laws that segregated everything in society, that removed most access to education for most black people. They could only read and write a little bit of math, and then they were basically told that they could study trades and home ec. They were not allowed to take anything resembling, say, our middle school or high schools. And they were restricted from many different jobs. The vote was taken away from them. And any attempts at political agitation were met with them being imprisoned. As you know, Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. And when he was growing up, Tutu was the child of teachers. He was well educated because he went to an Anglican school, Church of England school, in his town. And he was very impressed with a priest there, Trevor Huddleston, an English priest. And he wanted to become a teacher. He got married, and he and his wife trained as teachers. But then he couldn't put up with the highly segregated education system. So he refused to collude with the evil of that segregation and the education systems. And in his own words, he became a priest because, quote, "I needed a good job." That's what he said. That's why he became a priest. I think we're using this mic, aren't we? So he became very active, as you know, in nonviolent protests against apartheid and working to relieve the oppression, the very serious oppression of the poor and the needy in South Africa, almost all of whom were black. And I became familiar with him when he started traveling the United States, encouraging institutions and businesses and governments to stop investing in South Africa. And in fact, that is finally what brought South Africa to its knees. It's what made President Botha agree to release Mandela from prison, to acknowledge all political parties again. They'd become illegal, any political party but his. And during his work, Tutu was criticized by fellow church people and by politicians of getting involved in politics. They said, "You're supposed to be a churchman. You're not supposed to be working in politics." And his response was, "I'd love to be a churchman, but you're not doing your job, so I have to do it." He was a light to the world. He turned around government's opinions of these things by using a completely nonviolent way of protest. And he refused to collude with evil while he was doing it. Now, Jimmy Carter is probably most famous during his presidency for being a peacemaker, for bringing about the negotiations that led to the Camp David Accords, the historical accords between Egypt and Israel to end war in the Middle East of all places. But I would say even more famous as a former president for doing things that no other former president would do of. Number one, he taught Sunday school. He taught Sunday school. He taught Sunday school almost every Sunday with his wife until she died. I have friends who are priests in Georgia, and they go to hear him teach Sunday school to them. That's how great a Sunday school teacher he was. He worked with Habitat for Humanity, as you know. He went around the world working for universal voting rights throughout the world. He was a luminary. No matter what you think about him as a president of the United States, he was a luminary. He's probably the best example I can think of a Christian who just went all out, used every single gift he had to teach, explain the Bible to people, to take care of the poor by giving them housing, by liberating people, giving them the vote. I mean, he's the man being described in Isaiah 60. A luminary, a light giver. Now, when I think of these stories, I think, oh my gosh, I'm not anything like that. I'm just living in my little corner of the world, doing my little job. How could we possibly be anything like those light givers? I don't know that we're all called upon to do that. There need to be people working in every corner of the world. And I saw a beautiful example of this in a movie that's either called Small Things Like These or Little Things Like These. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting the title. It's an Irish film starring Cillian Murphy, who you probably know from Peaky Blinders, or he played Oppenheimer in Oppenheimer. And it's an amazing story of a man who confronts the evil of, the Magdalene houses, which were houses run by Irish nuns, where pregnant teenagers were sent there by their parents, forced to go there, usually by their parents, and basically imprisoned, forced to do very hard labor in laundries and other ways. That made a lot of money for the convents, and they didn't get any money. And then when their children gave birth, the babies were given away for adoption. In this story, he is a man who used to be an orphan himself, and he carries coal and peat. He runs a coal and peat delivery business. He employs people, and he does the heavy work himself. And one of his customers is the convent. So one day when he is delivering coal, he sees I would say maybe a 15-year-old girl being dragged by her mother and a nun into this place, and then the door slams behind her. And he feels very uncomfortable about this, very uncomfortable. He goes home and he's clearly troubled. So he goes back a couple days later to collect payment. He brings an invoice, but instead of doing what he normally does, which is to ring the bell and wait for someone to come, he sneaks in. And he goes in and sees what's happening, and he sees the girl who was dragged in, and she yells, help me get out of here. And he tells her where he lives and where his business is, and then the nuns find out that she's talking to him and get very angry. The next time he sees her, he goes to deliver peat in the middle of the night to the shed where they keep their fuel at this convent, and she has been thrown in there as punishment. She's lying on a coal pile, just covered with the dirt of coal in a very thin shift, shivering in the December night in Ireland. And he takes her back into the convent. He rings the bell and he says, I have taken her out of there. And you can tell that there's a cover-up going on. They bring him into the Mother Superior, and she says, oh, take her and get her clean and warm and bring her in for some hot tea. And it's Herod all over again. Herod all over again saying, oh, we're the nice people. We're not the ones doing evil. Just look this way over here. She reminds him that the convent school educates his 2 daughters and the other 3 that are getting ready to go to school, and how he doesn't want to ruin that, does he? And then she gives him a very big bribe, lots of money, and says, give it to your wife. He doesn't want to accept it, but he takes it because she keeps saying, take it, take it, take it. His wife tells him, don't go against the nuns. We'll just get in trouble. Just take care of your own 5 daughters. A local businesswoman knows that he is agitating about this, and she says, don't do anything. Just take care of your kids. You know the nuns have their hands in everything around here. In other words, it's an oppressive force in their society. And finally, he can't take it anymore. And he goes back the next night to see if they put her back there, and there she is again, weeping, freezing on a pile of coal. The poor, the needy, the oppressed. And he picks her up, and he says, I'm taking you home. And he walks her out of there and walks down the street. And he's been told the whole town's going to ostracize you if you do this. And they're looking out the windows and coming out the bars and everything and look at why he's taking this girl from the Magdalene house. And the last scene you see is he's walking into a house, and you can hear the sounds of his 5 daughters and his wife laughing in the kitchen, all happy around the warm stove. And then you just see him escort the young girl, her name is Sarah, around the corner, and the room goes silent. And then the movie ends. He refused to collude with evil. He was a good Christian man, doing what all do, doing his job, taking care of our family, being honest in his business practices. But then he's faced with confronting evil. And everybody tells him, just go along, just look this way, don't look that way. And he can't handle it. Small things like these. The title means that girl on the pile. The title means him, the little orphan boy who turned into the savior of this girl. It means anybody can do something life-changing in the smallest of actions. So what does it mean for us? As I've been thinking about this sermon, I thought about how often I have been inconvenienced or ostracized or maligned for a Christian stance. It's happened a few times. I hope it's happened to you a few times as well. And I wondered how often it's happened to me recently. And I thought to myself, if you're not being inconvenienced or ostracized or really badmouthed for your life as a Christian, are you really getting out there and confronting what's going on in society? Are you really siding with the poor and the needy and the oppressed? Because the more I stay in my little Christian cocoon of light and joy, and I like that cocoon, by the way, but the more I stay in that cocoon of light and joy, I notice that means I have to stop looking at things. And it doesn't always have to be confronting evil. It can be filling a need. Remember what the wise men did. They followed the light of Christ. They brought the gifts they had, and then they avoided siding with evil. They didn't have to lead a revolution against evil. They just had to say, I'm not going to help you do that. Sunday school teachers. That's what Jimmy Carter did in his retirement. We have a ton of kids at this church, a ton. Now, there's like 40 to 45 going to the little kids stuff, the kindergarten through 5th grade, and a few kids in the nursery as well. And then we have on record about 35 teenagers at this church, maybe 5 to 8 to 10 going. We're lacking a youth minister right now, but what we also lack are people to teach those kids. You don't need a PhD to teach Sunday school. What you need is a life as a Christian and the desire to be the light of Christ to teenagers and to children. Jimmy Carter did it while flying around the world doing all sorts of other things. It's one way to share the light of Christ with people is once a month, twice a month. Go down there and talk to teenagers, or go up there and talk to little children about the kind of Christian you are, to be the light of Christ to them. And if that's not your thing, hey, you can contribute the money that will pay for that youth director. You can come and sing on the day when the choir wasn't meant to sing so that we can all hear beautiful, beautiful sounds on a choir vacation day. Thank you, choir. That was very sweet of you. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't always have to be an all the time thing. But there's going to be a time, hopefully, when you feel a prick of conscience, like this man does, this Irish man does in this movie, and you say, somebody's got to help that girl. Somebody's got to get that dog off the streets. Somebody's got to feed those people. And then you realize, as I often do, that somebody is you. Amen.